Hi everyone, and welcome to the tutorial on cellular respiration. Today we are going to run through the processes that occur during cellular respiration in various organisms. So, all cells require energy, and the chemical energy they usually burn is glucose. Okay, so the cell takes glucose and converts it through various pathways to produce ATP. Okay, this is the energy that is made available to the cells to use. Okay, and the process that animals convert or organisms convert glucose into energy is via a process known as cellular respiration, or just sometimes called respiration. Okay, respiration can be either aerobic or anaerobic, and it occurs all the time in the cells of all living things, including animals, fungi, protists, and bacteria. So if it's alive, it has to undergo respiration. So the rates of respiration depend on the state of the organism. If an organism is in hibernation, or if an organism is sleeping, the rate of respiration is reduced. If an organism is highly active, the rate of respiration is high. This is due to the fact that if an organism is moving about, doing lots of things, it requires lots of ATP. If an organism is resting or in a hibernating state, then the organism requires less ATP, and so thus the rate falls. So the energy from glucose, the process of energy transfer from glucose to ATP is not 100% efficient. As with most things, right, nothing is 100% efficient. So about 40% of the chemical energy present in glucose is transferred to ATP. The remaining 60% appears as heat energy. Okay, so the metabolism of the body, respiration, maintains the human body temperature at roughly 37 degrees. Okay, the heat energy produced by living cells cannot be used to drive any reactions. Alright, it's only the ATP. So that 40% of chemical energy you get from glucose is the ATP that is driving all your cellular processes. So instead of heat energy, right, heat energy is used to maintain core temperature, and this keeps our enzymes functioning, and it keeps us protected from the cold. Okay, so energy from glucose. Glucose is broken down. It is a high energy molecule and is broken down to low energy molecules that include CO2 and H2O, and in that it releases heat energy and ATP. So the equation below, C6H12O6, is glucose plus oxygen goes to H2O or water and CO2 carbon dioxide, and in this process it releases energy. Okay, so there are three stages of cellular respiration. The first stage is glycolysis, and this is where glucose is broken down into pyruvate. Alright, and this occurs in the cytosol. The second stage is the citric acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle, and this occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria. Okay, and this process is all about converting the rest of the broken down glucose into carbon dioxide and releasing hydrogen carrying molecules. The third process is electron transport. Now this occurs in the cristae, the membrane, the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Along this membrane there's various cytochromes. These pump hydrogen ions, right, creating a potential energy that the mitochondria can tap into to produce ATP. Now here's the process here. Okay, so glycolysis occurs in the cytosol. The electron carriers enter the mitochondria. The product of glycolysis is pyruvate. Pyruvate then is converted into acetyl-CoA, which enters the Krebs cycle, produces more electron carriers, which then proceed to the electron transport. Overall, this entire process produces ATP. Okay, all three stages produce some ATP. The most is produced in electron transport. So, glycolysis is all about the splitting of glucose into three carbon molecules called pyruvate. Okay, so they're 3 carbon chains long and they're named pyruvate. The products of this reaction, alright, is 2 NADH and 2 pyruvate molecules. Now, in reference to ATP, you actually require 2 ATP to begin the breakdown of glucose. Okay, you then produce 4 ATP once it is converted into pyruvate, or 2 molecules of pyruvate. Okay, this means that you have a net overall production of 2 ATP. Now, bear in mind, this video, everything I talk about, I'm talking about per glucose molecule, okay, not per pyruvate. So everything is double. If in an exam or any questions you see, they start talking about per pyruvate molecule, you have to halve the numbers you are seeing here. So in preparation for the Krebs cycle, there's a process as it enters the mitochondria called pre-Krebs. This is when more processing is done to the pyruvate. Okay, so the pyruvate is then converted into 2 molecules of acetyl-CoA. Now acetyl-CoA is 2 carbon chains long. Okay, this means that per pyruvate I have lost 1 carbon dioxide. So overall I've lost 2 carbon dioxide, and I also create 2 electron carriers in the form of NADH. Okay, so following on from the pre-Krebs, we have the citric acid cycle. In this cycle, acetyl-CoA enters the mitochondria and then enters the Krebs cycle and is systematically broken down through a process of enzymatic steps into CO2, ATP, NADH, and FADH2. Okay, this process is all about creating loaded electron acceptors. All right, these guys here. Now, after the pre-Krebs, we have 2 molecules of acetyl-CoA. They enter the Krebs cycle. These 2 molecules yield 4 CO2, 2 ATP, 6 NADH, and 2 FADH2 collectively. All right. This process is a cycle. Okay, so acetyl-CoA enters, it's broken down to evolve CO2, and then the process just continues. Okay, the loaded electron acceptors are then sent to electron transport. It is here that in the membrane of the mitochondria we have these molecules called cytochromes. These cytochromes take the electron charge, all right, from the NADH or FADH2, right, and they pump hydrogen ions into the space between the inner membrane and outer membrane of the mitochondria, all right, into the cristae. Okay, it's in here that these hydrogen ions create a source of potential energy for the mitochondria to use. All right, now as it flows along to the end of the cytochromes, what we have at the end is something called a molecule called embedded in the membrane of the inner membrane of the mitochondria is a molecule called ATP synthase, and this molecule, all right, captures or harnesses the energy of this potential energy of hydrogen ions. What happens is a hydrogen ion, right, wants to flow with the concentration gradient, so it wants to flow back into the matrix. So what happens is the ATP synthase lets it. It acts like a water wheel, okay, and lets the hydrogen ion pass through. Every time a hydrogen ion passes through ATP synthase, a cog turns, and it pushes ADP and inorganic phosphate together to create ATP. Now overall, it creates 32 to 34 ATP, and it also creates water, okay? So if there is no oxygen, the electron chain cannot continue, okay? And this means that we now need to go to anaerobic respiration, all right? So if there's no oxygen, this final step cannot occur, okay? If this cannot occur, respiration or aerobic respiration cannot occur, all right? So the outcome of the 3 stages, all right? Glycolysis yields 4 ATP, but a net production of 2. Krebs cycle yields 2 ATP, and electron transport yields 32 to 34 ATP. Overall, we generate 36 to 38 ATP. So, the reaction for cellular respiration, okay, refers to the breaking down of glucose, and here's the overall reaction, alright? Glucose plus oxygen is converted to carbon dioxide and water, alright, and yields 36 to 38 ATP. Alright, so when there is no oxygen, alright, fermentation occurs, or anaerobic respiration. Alright, this is the process where pyruvate is converted into lactic acid in animals or alcohol and carbon dioxide in plants, okay, microorganisms such as yeast and bacteria. Fermentation is necessary because it prevents the accumulation of pyruvate and thus allows glycolysis to continue, okay? It is also necessary because you only have a finite amount of electron acceptors, alright, like NAD. You need to free these up, alright, in order to prevent damage to the cells. So anaerobic respiration in mammals. In the absence of oxygen, okay, pyruvate is converted into lactic acid. Okay, this yields 2 ATP per glucose molecule. Lactic acid begins to build up, you feel pain and fatigue in your muscles, alright? This is to prevent you from continually exercising in the absence of oxygen, alright? Lactic acid in muscle tissue is converted back to pyruvate, and the pyruvate can then enter the Krebs cycle and the process can continue. The value of the anaerobic pathway in mammals. Aerobic respiration produces almost 20 times the amount of ATP than are produced in glycolysis. Okay, cells of animals and plants rely on anaerobic respiration only if there's not enough oxygen. Okay, in some cases, rapid rate of release of energy in glycolysis can be vital in short sprints. Okay, so to get away from animals, you had to run fast. Okay, in order to do that, you needed immediate energy, okay, in the form of glycolysis. Alcoholic fermentation. During fermentation by yeast, pyruvate is broken down into carbon dioxide and ethanol, okay, the alcohol. It also frees up the loaded electron acceptors, alright? So wine making and beer making and spirit making all require fermentation to produce alcohol in order for us to drink. Okay, comparison of anaerobic respiration to aerobic respiration is here. Okay, it's good to look at the comparison. One requires oxygen, one doesn't. One has a rapid rate of ATP production, one has a slow rate. Okay, one has a less efficient energy transfer, one has a more efficient energy transfer. One produces 2 molecules of ATP, one produces 36 to 38 molecules. All right, and the various end products that are associated with both these reactions. Okay, so let's run through this one more time. Here's the overview of respiration. Here we have glucose being broken down to pyruvate, okay, requiring 2 ATP, making 2 NADH, and releasing 4 ATP. Okay, so a net overall production of 2 ATP. Pyruvate then enters pre-Krebs, where 2 CO2 is released. Okay, it is also this stage, if there is lack of oxygen, it then is converted to alcohol in plants or lactate in animals. Also at this stage there is 2 NAD produced. Okay, then 2-acetyl-CoA, okay, enter the Krebs cycle. This creates the production of 4 CO2, 2 ATP, and 6 NADH and 2 FADH2. Okay, these load electron carriers are then sent to the mitochondria, where we have 4 cytochromes, 3 that pump and 1 that doesn't. Okay, they pump hydrogen ions into the cristae, or the inner space between the outer membrane and inner membrane of the mitochondria. Okay, in here, this buildup of hydrogen ions creates a potential energy store. Okay, ATP synthase, all right, the molecule, or the molecule embedded in the membrane, okay, the protein channel, it allows hydrogen ions to pass through. But per hydrogen ion, as it passes through, it converts ADP and PI into ATP, which the cell can then use. Okay, as a hydrogen ion flows through, oxygen comes in. The oxygen captures the electron that is flowing through the membrane, okay, that has pumped the hydrogen ions. It then combines with the hydrogen ions that pass through ATP synthase and is converted into water. Overall, electron transport produces 32 to 34 ATP, Krebs cycle produces 4, and glycolysis produces 2. Okay, this leads to an overall 36 to 38 ATP. So there is also other substrates for respiration. Okay, fatty acids can be used for respiration, also amino acids. All right, so when you're starved for long periods, your body begins to break down tissue. Okay, and this tissue can be used if necessary for survival. All right, fats, as we know, provide far more energy per gram than carbohydrates do, and thus can be used if your body is really efficient at processing fat. It can use it during states when you are inactive, all right, because it requires more oxygen in order to do this. So the link between our last tutorial on photosynthesis and this is cellular respiration. Okay, so the carbon dioxide and water are the waste products of respiration. However, these are the starting products or starting reactants of photosynthesis. Okay, photosynthesis is endergonic. It's building up. It's creating energy-rich molecules. However, cellular respiration is exergonic. Okay, it is an energy-releasing reaction. It's the breaking down to provide lower energy molecules to make ATP, and photosynthesis is the building up to produce carbohydrates. All right. Now remember, the main point is that all living organisms has to respire. Just because plants and photosynthetic bacteria undergo photosynthesis does not mean they do not respire. Okay, that's it for respiration. Thanks for listening to this tutorial.